Welcome, everyone, to Creating a Family, talk about adoption and foster care. Today, we're going to be talking with a panel of young adult transracial adoptees about their experience growing up and now as adults. But before we start, I wanted to tell you that we are totally aware, obviously, that everybody's life has been really turned upside down by this coronavirus and the isolation, schools being closed. And we're going to be bringing you in the next 2 weeks 2 shows directly relevant to your experience and what's happening right now. We'll be talking with Carol Lozier, whom I absolutely love, about surviving and thriving while being cooped up with your kids during Corona. And then the following week, we'll be talking with Heather Forbes about homeschooling kids with learning challenges during Corona isolation. So make sure that you let your friends know. Stay tuned. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, do. And those shows will be coming up, and I know you're going to enjoy them. Today, we're going to be talking with a panel of young adult transracial adoptees about what it's like to be adopted and raised by parents of a different race. We have Katie Bullard, Nathan Faust, Jack Torello, and Angie Legg. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. However, I thought what I would do is I'm going to kind of ground your story and to tie you into this topic. So what I'd like to do, and I'm just going to go around to each of you, and I'm going to hit the highlights of your adoption story. So what I'd like you to answer is tell us how old you are now, what is your race or ethnicity, and then what is the race or ethnicity of your parents, how old you were at adoption, and where you were raised, and how diverse was the community in which you were raised. So, and if you get lost and forget some of those, I'll remind you. I know that's a lot to have to remember at the beginning. So Katie, Katie Bullard, let's begin with you. Tell us how old are you now, and what is your race and what's your parents' race?
Yeah, so I am 24 now, about to be 25 in a couple days. My parents are both white and I am Chinese.
Okay, and how old were you at adoption, and where do you live, and is it, or where were you raised, and how diverse was it?
Yeah, so I was 4 months old about when I was adopted. I grew up in Brevard, North Carolina, so it was a pretty small town, so it wasn't very diverse in regards to individuals who were identified as Asian.
Okay. Nathan Faust. All right. Can you tell us your age and then your ethnicity and a race and that of your parents?
Definitely. So I'm 23. I'm mixed race, black and white, but I'm black presenting. So both my parents are white. I was adopted at birth from Salem General Hospital, and I was raised in Portland, Oregon.
Okay. And how diverse would you say the community in which you were raised, your neighborhood community, schools, that type of thing?
Portland isn't exactly the most diverse place in the world, but they were always really welcoming, and I never really felt left out because of my race.
Okay. Jack Torella, tell us your age now, your ethnicity and race, or race, and that of your parents.
Yes, I'm 24 years old. I'm about to be 25 next week.
Oh my goodness, you and Katie, happy birthday to both of you. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm Vietnamese American. Both my parents are second generation immigrants, so I guess they're white. My father is Italian American. My mom, I guess, would be Russian American.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, cool. And how old were you at adoption?
I was 5 months old when I was adopted from Vietnam.
Okay. And where were you raised, and how diverse was your community, your neighborhood?
I was raised in Maplewood, New Jersey. I suppose nowadays it's a little bit more diverse, but when I was growing up, I was one of the very few Asian Americans in my school. There are actually quite a few, I guess, Chinese American adopted girls that I grew up with, but I didn't really connect with them until, I guess when I was in high school until later.
Okay. And Angie Legg, tell us how
Yeah.
old you are now, your race, and that of your parent.
Now I am 35. I am Haitian American. I was born in Miami, Florida, and I've been with my family since I was a baby, but I actually wasn't officially adopted until I was 6 years old. I, like I mentioned, was born in Miami, but spent most of my life on the Connecticut shoreline. So I spent most of my life in suburbia, very just not diverse at all, but I had diverse places to go. So I mixed it up. I lived in a suburban town, but I was able to get to the city pretty easily.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All
And
right.
my family is white.
Okay, got it. All right. And you were raised by a single mom, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, got it. All right. So we're obviously talking about transracial adoption. So let me just start by saying, was it hard for you to be raised by parents of a different race? And I think, given that we're a panel and this is audio, so I'm going to direct questions to each of you. But I'd like for everyone to be able to chime in on every question. So I'll just kind of direct them, but feel free if you want to join in. And I haven't directed to speak up and just say who you are, and then share your view. All right. So was it hard for you to be raised from a different race from your parents? Angie, let's start with you.
No, actually, it wasn't. They didn't make me feel different. And so I didn't actually understand that there was a difference. It just felt very, very normal to me. And I didn't realize it until my teenage years, 12, 13, kind of understood that it was a different situation, but then the actual insecurities or the questions and things started to pop around that time. But for the most part, family's family.
So for you, it wasn't particularly hard until you got to be the tweens, early adolescence, and then you started trying to figure things out.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah. Jack, how about you?
I don't think it wasn't difficult for the most part. I didn't realize like I was a different race until like maybe I was 4 and then maybe 5. And other kids in school would make it apparent that I would be different. And then like I finally understood that I was, not white. And then, I was Asian, I was Vietnamese. But my parents were very encouraging in the fact that, they wanted to have me understand what adoption was and that I was Vietnamese American and that they still love me, even though I wasn't the same as them.
Okay. And Nathan, how about you? I probably maybe at the beginning it would be helpful if I would say Nathan is biracial, an infant adopted domestically. Okay, so go ahead, Nathan. Just I'm thinking it's probably helpful to remind people just so that they understand who's speaking. Okay, so Nathan, go ahead. How about for you?
I would say that, well, I agree with everybody else that I didn't really realize the significance that I was a different race than my parents until I was around my middle school years. And it really came from other kids just pointing it out to me, just saying, hey, why are your parents white and you're not? And it took me like a little bit just to comprehend what that meant. But also, so I'm openly adopted. So I've known my birth mom my entire life. But so until I was 8, I didn't realize that other people didn't have birth parents. I thought that everyone had just 2 sets of parents just in their lives at all times. But so my birth mom is my other white half as well. And so I wasn't able to see the fact that I was Black, especially being raised in Portland, which isn't, again, the most diverse city in the world. But so once I really started recognizing that I was mixed race and that I wasn't the same as my parents, I had to go find the answers myself. But so that was mainly pointed out to me through other kids around me.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if it was, I'm thinking that it might have been harder because you had 3 parents, all of which were white. Because it sounds like you did not have contact with your Black father, biological father. So did that make it harder?
I wouldn't say it made it harder. My biological father and I came back into contact when I was around 11. And so he actually moved to Sydney, Australia. And that's why it was a little hard to get in touch with him. But through that, I've always been able to have him in my life where I've been able to reach out for questions if I could. But so just on the day-to-day basis, it was being raised in a predominantly white environment by predominantly white parents and not recognizing the significance of being Black in that environment and what that meant and why it wouldn't be the same as everyone else.
Okay. And Katie, what about you? And Katie was adopted as a 4-month-old from China.
Yeah, so similar to uh, other folks, I didn't realize I was adopted until um, about middle school. I knew that I looked different from my parents, but that was really all it was. They always made me feel loved and accepted no matter what, and especially when, so I come from a multiracial family as well. So my younger brother was adopted from Vietnam, and so it was uh, sort of a way of knowing that I looked different, but I looked similar to my younger brother. So it didn't ever really click until other kids my age started saying, "Oh, well, why aren't your parents Asian? Because you and your brother are both Asian,"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
type. So
I see. I'm seeing it sounds like for everyone, it's around the middle school, 12 to 11 to 13, let's say, that it becomes more of an issue. And from all of you, it sounds like more because it was brought up through your peers. And Katie, let me just confirm, you said you didn't really realize you were adopted. Do you mean you didn't realize that you were actually adopted, or you didn't realize that you were the importance of transracial adoption wasn't something you realized?
yeah, so the importance of it was something that just never came to mind.
Yeah. Okay. And so the next question is, I think you may have already answered this. And yeah, no, in fact, I want to answer that because did you face any issues? And it sounds like the issues that you faced were all coming from other kids and generally around the early adolescence. Uh, Katie had a brother that was also a transracial adoptee. Nathan, do you have any siblings that are also transracial adoptees?
I do not. I was raised as an only child, but I do have three half siblings through my dad.
Okay. And Jack, do you have any siblings that are transracially adopted?
I do not. I have three siblings who are older than I am, who are the biological children of my parents.
Okay. And Angie, what about you? Do you have any siblings?
It's a little bit more complicated, but my mother, who actually ended up adopting me, didn't have any children, so I'm her only child. But the family that I was adopted into as a whole, I had two brothers, and one was part of the family originally, a birth child, and the other older brother was adopted.
Was it a transracial adoption?
No, no.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Katie, do you think that you're the only one with experience with an adopted sibling? Do you think it was easier for you because you had someone who looked like you?
Um, I'm not really sure. I don't think it was easier or harder. It was just natural
Hmm.
because I was pretty young when he was adopted. I was 4, so I don't have very many memories of that time.
Hmm.
I do actually also have 2 older siblings who are biologically related who are also transracial. And so they are mixed with African American, I think some Cuban and maybe Puerto Rican, I believe, in there as well. And so I remember them being adopted. And I think that was a little more challenging because it was some not social, excuse me, age dynamics at play from going from the oldest child to the second to youngest,
Hmm.
being the only girl to having an older sister. So it was quite a few things I think that were all into play. But
Hmm.
my parents always made sure that my younger brother and I, and then my 2 newer siblings, um, were still part of a family. And I grew up knowing them because they were also being fostered by my aunt as well. So it wasn't 2
Okay.
complete strangers coming to the house.
Okay. Um, we think a lot now, or at least those of us who are in the adoption education world, we think a lot about racial identity and how that impacts transracial adoptees. You know, as a young child, most often you were under the umbrella of your family, and pretty soon you're seen as just a part of your family, or that's how we hope it happens. Um, But as you grow and you go out in the world, people see you not only as a child of your family, but also as a Chinese American or a Black American or a Vietnamese American. And so I'm hoping this is not too personal of a question, but I'm wondering that as a young adult now, how you would describe your comfort level with your racial identity. Let me start with you, Jack. And Jack, just to remind everybody, was adopted as a under 6 month old from Vietnam.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with the fact that I'm adopted and that I'm a Vietnamese American living in living in today's America. I mean, I came to terms with like who I was and my identity, I guess, when I was like about 16, because that was like the first time I ever visited back to Vietnam with my family. And then it really shaped my perspective about like who I was. And then on top of that, I also accidentally met my birth mother and her family as well. So yeah, to answer that question.
Okay. All right. Katie, how about you? How comfortable do you feel about your racial identity?
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with being Chinese American. I don't, if I had to venture, I would say there was maybe a year or two where I was feeling socially isolated in a way. But even then, I wouldn't really ever, I don't recall ever truly feeling displaced in a way.
Okay. Nathan, how about you? And Nathan is a multiracial adoptee, adopted at birth.
I would say that when it comes to my racial identity, I'm becoming more and more comfortable with it, but at the same time, I'm still growing. When I was growing up, I didn't have that many African American role models in my life. And while I found that everyone around me was very loving, no one was able to really answer the questions that I wanted to answer, just about what does it mean to be a Black man? What does it mean to be a Black man in America? Things like that. And so as I became more and more cognizant of it, I had to kind of develop my own identity. And the sad thing is, pretty much what I had, because I didn't really let anyone know that I was in on this or ask for resources, all I had was media. And so at the same time, while I was growing up and developing into the person that I am today, I would also tie that in with perceived stereotypes or the ways that Black men should be. And so what I felt is that what I found is that wasn't the most healthy thing for me. And so that kind of delayed it a little bit. But over the past couple of years, I've really taken a step back and asked myself, what does it mean to be me? And what does it mean to be Black in America?
What has helped with that? And what has helped you? You said as a child, turning to media wasn't necessarily the most productive for you. So what has helped you now as an adult?
I think what's helped me most as an adult is actually recognizing the areas where I've lacked education through my own not really asking for help. I thought that I could figure this out by myself, and I didn't want people to hear about my insecurities with my own identity because I didn't want them to think I was weak or something like that. But so once I really opened myself up and said, okay, hey, I need help. I want role models. I want to like open myself up to the culture and find out who I am. Once I asked for help in that way, people really started coming out of the woodwork, and they were all very willing to help me and join me on this journey. And so it's been about me finding role models and actually asking the questions and getting out of my comfort zone.
Okay, excellent. And Angie, how about you? And Angie is a Black Haitian American raised by a white family.
Yeah, in the beginning, it was definitely difficult. The stereotypes, a lot of people like to just assume you're supposed to talk a certain way and act a certain way. So growing up, I know that was hard, but meeting my real family was really, really helpful. And it helped me to understand, I mean, the gene pool is actually very incredible, the science behind it, and the fact that you can carry so many characteristics and talents. And I had all of these different artistic talents inside of me, and I didn't know where they were coming from. And then when I met my family, I saw, you know, my brother's an architect, my father's a painter, my other brother is a film director, producer, and these are all things that have been inside of me and that I've pursued without even knowing. So I do feel like I have a very, very strong identity. I've had a strong identity, but it's been challenged my entire life.
When you say it's been challenged, it sounds like now that you have met your birth family, you see mirrors of your talents and where some of those came from. Um, and what was it challenged prior to that? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, it was vindication that, I am being my true self, regardless of who I was raised by, despite my external environment, I am true to myself, really. And
Mhm.
it just allowed me to understand, my environment a little bit more.
How old were you when you met your birth family?
24.
24. Okay, got it. We hear from some transracial adoptees that they are sometimes perceived, or they feel like they are perceived, as if they are not being Black enough, or Chinese enough, or Vietnamese enough by members of their racial community. Have any of you experienced this? Katie, let me start with you.
Um, I don't think so. I think the people who I've met who identify as Chinese, one was adopted as well into a set of white parents. So she didn't have the Chinese culture background. And then a friend who I have now whose family is a mix of the Asian cultures. Um, they're pretty, I think, westernized when it comes to their culture as well with some things. So I've never felt like I wasn't Chinese enough by any
Hmm.
means. I think I've sort of taken some of the more Eastern uh, social traditions just because I like them a lot. But I've never been told outright, oh, well, you should have done this because you're Chinese. So clearly it's the way that you should do it or whatever.
Okay. Nathan, how about you? Have you either felt that you were not Black enough, or that you were being perceived as not Black enough? I mean, there's a lot of racial epithets that can be thrown around that people, some people feel like that. Some people have reported being called. Um, have you experienced that in your life?
I definitely have, but what I found is that I kind of put that on myself. But at the same time, it is fair to say that I really wasn't prepared for that feeling because, especially being mixed race, there was some weight behind the words. So when people said I wasn't Black enough, I could say, oh, well, I mean, like, I'm not 100% Black. But then when people are like, oh, you're not white, I'm like, yeah, I'm 50% Black. And so I found myself in the middle there. There's just one line from Earl Sweatshirt, which is just too Black for the white kids, too white for the Blacks. And like once I heard that, that's where I really resonated with that. It was just,
Yeah.
okay, I'm on this dividing line and I don't know which side to go to. But as
Hmm.
I started growing, what I found is that what's most important is that I'm me and that I'm comfortable with myself first. And then I can begin recognizing the significance of things around that, where it's not I'm excluded from both, but I'm included in both.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Jack, have you felt that or perceived that you were being thought of as not Vietnamese enough, or not Asian enough, or whatever, by that community?
I've only ever felt that to like very, very small degrees. Just like, very insignificant comments from like people within the Vietnamese community, down here in Philadelphia or in Vietnam itself. But they also understand that like, once they get to know me better, that like I was raised, I was adopted, I was raised in a white family, and that but I'm also open to learning more about who they are, so I can be more like them.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You described that, that you're actively seeking role models in that community.
Mhm.
Angie, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely experienced that where people, like I mentioned a little while ago, they say I talk too white or whatever the scenario is. But Oreo is the terminology that you get, Black on
Hmm.
the outside, white on the inside. So
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely dealt with that growing up from all sides, every nationality. And I'm a dark Haitian, so I don't get mixed up, like sometimes with, like some of the other guests, they're lighter skinned. It can almost, some people, the white community, I guess we can say, that most of us grew up in, can almost give like a leeway. But when you're like really, really dark, what I've found, just me personally, is that, there's a very, very specific way that I should be acting, talking, and it should be what they see on the TV. And it's not. And it throws a lot of people off.
And so you definitely felt it from the white community. How about from the, I don't know if you had much of a Haitian community, how about a Black community, whether or not it was Haitian or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Connecticut is a very diverse state. A lot of our cities are very, very diverse. And I went to a very diverse college, and I would get that all the time. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And
How did that impact you of not knowing? Nathan described feeling like he was walking the line in between the two. How did that? Did you feel like you were walking the line between the white and the Black community, or not fitting into either one, or did you feel like you fit into both?
I still walk the line, and I still, I can fit into both. I can fit into both better now because I have so much more self-awareness, and I'm an adult. And, I don't let the emotions take over me. But it could be really, really difficult. It is a fine line, but I can typically, go bounce back and forth. I can, without having to actually change my personality. I know a lot of people who have to change their personality in order to fit into a certain group. And I used to do that because I was completely unsure of who I was once people started pointing out the fact that I was different or that my situation was different. And I'm like, oh yeah, it is different. And then, that's where it messes you all up.
So you used to do, I think, what we call that code switching, where you would change who you were to fit the group you were with. And while that's not exclusive to adoption at all, it certainly is a part of it. So, do you still feel like you do that, or have you felt, or do you do it less now that you were in your mid-30s?
I feel like, so I'm in sales as well. So I feel like there is a time and a place now for everything. I can present myself in an authentic way to everyone, but I still think there's a little bit of weaving between, groups and nationalities and even age groups. I mean, you don't talk to children the way that you talk to adults. You know what I mean? So I think there's still that play, and it taught me how to do that successfully, but still stay true to myself, which I feel very, very confident in myself at this time in my life.
Which is, of course, what we all hope at some point in our lives that we reach.
Amen.
So, yeah. Amen. Amen. All right. So you guys have all alluded to some of these, but okay, I want to hear about what you think. Maybe I was going to say what you think your parents did right that helped you. So let's. Can you give some tips from your own life, either from what your parents did well or didn't do well, for other parents who are considering or are just starting out in transracial adoption? What would be some tips that you would suggest for them to consider and do to make it easier for their children? So, Angie, you were just the one who was speaking, so let me go ahead and start with you. What would be, and everybody give one tip and then we'll come back around. So if you've got, think of a couple and then give one and then we'll come back around. Angie, starting with you, what would be a tip?
If you are to adopt an African American child, take them to an African American salon or barber. That is a huge tip. I think my mother was very scared. They didn't know what to do with my hair growing up, and it was difficult. And I believe that if they had done that sooner, it would have been, but there was no services for them. They didn't know, what was going on. They just had, and there was no internet really, so they couldn't even Google it. But don't be afraid, to reach out to the community of your child and ask for help.
Okay. And specifically, well, that's two tips really, because that's in
sorry.
general. No, it's okay. In general, ask for help. But in specific, ask for help with hair care. All right. Katie, what would be a tip that you would want parents to are thinking about, or in the beginning stages of transracial adoption, to know?
Yeah, so I would say probably when your child is growing up, tell them stories of the adoption process, and then adopting the child and sort of that early childhood formation, like mental settlement stage. So you make it a normal part of life. So they know that they're adopted, but they never feel like they were unloved in a way.
So let me see am I summarizing you correctly to say that make sure that the discussion of being adopted is something that happens early, frequent, and is a natural part of growing up. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Jack, how about you? What would be your tip for parents at the beginning of this process?
At the beginning of the adoption process, if they were going to adopt, I'd say
well, transracial, in specific, transracial.
I'd say give the child access to outlets of where they came from, whether it be films, music, cuisine, getting in touch with the community, getting in touch with other communities of transracial families that have adopted from the same country. I think giving them access and the option to do that while growing into themselves as an American, I think would be really helpful for them.
Okay, and I'm really glad you talked about books and film and things like that, because that's infinitely doable. All right, Nathan, your tip.
What I would say is that my parents, much like Jack said, my parents gave me every opportunity to be able to experience my culture whenever I could, such as if there's an exhibit coming to town, or that the books on my shelves were books about Black kids. But it was never something that was forced on me, like, you have to be Black, you have to recognize this. It was, okay, when you start recognizing these things, we're going to be there by your side, and you're going to have all the resources available. And it's always going to be your choice about how fast and how hard you want to lean into your racial identity.
And I know you've described that you are actively in that stage of learning and becoming and understanding what it means to be a Black man in America. Have your parents been an ally in this process for you?
They definitely have. I would say they were allies in the sense of that they could always recommend books that they were reading themselves. They would often read books first before I did, just to understand the frame of mind, or at least try to understand the frame of mind that I would be coming from. They taught me the significance of certain words. They taught me about certain actions, especially at a young age, where if there was a large scale event that was going on that pertained to my race, they would always invite or encourage me to go. Where I had the opportunity to go to Mississippi to learn about the civil rights movement, and they really pushed me and supported me the entire time. And I went, it was an incredible experience. And when I got back, they put aside all the time I wanted to decompress, debrief, discuss. So them just being there as a support system for me while going through my journey showed me that I wasn't alone on this.
Okay. And so that's another tip. Be an ally, be a supportive, don't be threatened, and let your child know that you aren't alone. You actually gave a lot, including reading books first so you could talk about them with your kids. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Angie, you're up. Any thoughts on any tips too? Another tip that you might give?
I know that my family told me from the very beginning, like if you mentioned that just the process, getting to know the process right from the beginning. They never not told me I was adopted. I just thought it was normal to be adopted and to have this mixed modern family, but they were very, very truthful from Like I remember even being like 3, 4 years old and knowing that I had a mother somewhere else and so on and so forth. But they loved me unconditional. I mean, that at the end of the day, I absolutely ended up in a better situation than I had, than I would have. And they just loved me unconditionally during some of the toughest times in Florida. They wouldn't even let them adopt me. It was illegal. So they were, fighting segregation all out of love. So you just got to keep going. It's a tough process, and you just got to keep pushing forward if you love that child.
Okay. Katie, do you have another tip?
I mean, I think what I would say has been covered.
Okay,
Make
that's fair.
resources available and speak openly, love unconditionally.
Okay. Jack, do you have any other tips?
I have tips in regards if you're going to adopt, say, someone from Vietnam, especially since the rules have changed. So these days you cannot do, adoptions of children under 5 years old. And there was an issue a number of years ago where, I guess there were problems with, human trafficking and things like that. So international adoptions and even local adoptions within Vietnam, are restricted to children 5 and up, or for children who have a disability or groups of siblings and so on and so forth. My tip for parents who decide to do that, is I would get in, once let's say you go back to America, I would get in touch with Catalyst Foundation. It's a group that has an organization that fights human trafficking in Vietnam, but also we are a community of Vietnamese adoptees who stay in contact together. And every year we meet, for this culture camp, over the summer for a number of days, and it's really fulfilling for a lot of the kids who come out. So like I do that every summer with my girlfriend and I, we volunteer for that and, serve as like mentors and role models for the kids because, they grow up in communities that are predominantly white and, they don't have anyone to look up to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Nathan, do you have any final tips to give before we move on to another topic?
I would say that you do have to recognize that it's not going to be easy, especially because outside of adoption itself, the added wrinkle of a transracial adoption is thrown in there. And to not think that it's going to be easier, that it's going to be something you solve overnight, it's a constant learning process and it's always evolving based on the situation, based on the times, based on how much you already know, based on how much your child already knows. And so through that, just recognize it's not going to be easy, but in the end, it's definitely going to be worth it.
Mm-hmm. All right. I wanted to circle back to something that actually I think, Jack, you were the one who mentioned both of these homeland tours as well as culture camps. These are both more common. Well, obviously, the homeland tour would be more common in international adoption, and so are culture camps. So less common in domestic adoption. But so let me just talk a little bit about the importance. And I'll start with you, Jack. Then how important would you say homeland tours, and you've just mentioned that culture camps were immensely important. How important was homeland tours? You only went on one, I guess, but how important was that for you?
I think that is a very key fundamental thing to implement when the time is right for the said child in terms of like shaping their identity. I didn't go on Catalyst cultural tour. I went to Vietnam independently with my family, but when I was 11, I did the Vietnam culture camp once, but from there I always wanted to go back and do it again, but I was always tied up during the summer. But like I rediscovered Catalyst when I was in college. I wanted to volunteer and reconnect with Catalyst Foundation and reconnect with the Vietnam culture camp. I think it really it really is a really fulfilling experience to be able to do that.
Hmm. Okay, so that's another, I suppose, tip would be to, if at all possible, to connect your child to their culture every way you can, and if that obviously is involving an international adoption, to either take your child back to their country of birth or to find a culture camp, and for children being adopted transracially here within the United States. There are other opportunities to expose your kids, less so camps, but certainly other opportunities to expose your child to the culture from which they were born. Let me pause for a moment and remind everyone that this show is underwritten by the Jockey Being Family Foundation. Their mission is to support families after adoption so that they thrive throughout the lifetime of adoption. They are committed to providing support to families nationwide and to help these forever homes become lasting places of love. Your support is vital to their success. And please visit their website, jockeybeingfamily.com, to see how your support can impact families nationwide. All right. I wanted to talk a little bit of the two guys here because I think that, and I might be wrong on this. In fact, Katie and Angie might disagree, but I've often wondered in some ways, and I've talked to other transracial adoptees who have said they feel like it's harder in some ways being a guy and being transracially adopted. And some of the things they have said is that um, the perception for Black men in the U.S. is hard, and then for Asian men, our standards of attractiveness and our standards of beauty, I guess, is our masculinity and stuff don't always lend themselves to expand to Asians, and so Asian guys feel like they're often left out. Um, so let me talk, and we'll speak with both of you guys. Jack, let me start with you. Do you think any of that rings true? Of course, you don't know what the female experience is like, but the from a Asian guy or from a Vietnamese guy standpoint, were there things that were specific to your gender that you think that and race that made it more difficult?
Um, I felt it was slightly difficult, and I don't know. I always ask myself, if it was me, or if something that I did, or it was just the fact that I'm just an Asian. It's always been a question that's been on my mind. But I mean, you know, it's honestly, I think, yeah, it was kind of tough, I suppose, growing up. But I mean, I kind of, you know we come back again, I'm comfortable with myself and I accept myself for who I am, and I have a support system in place. So I think that's the most important part.
Okay, Nathan, how about you? And nowadays, with you know, the fear people have for their Black young men, and so, I mean, how is being a Black male in the U.S., being raised by white parents, does that make it? Do you think it's harder for males and females?
I wouldn't say it's harder for men than women. I would definitely say that all genders have their own issues to go through, and that mine specifically weren't exactly the easiest for me. Like, again, trying to come to my identity and then recognize the weight and significance of being a Black man in America. So there were some
Hmm.
points where, let's say, if I heard the N word, how am I supposed to react? Because that word never really was around me growing up, because I was constantly surrounded by forward-thinking white Americans who would never use that word in my presence. So when I started hearing it for the first time, I just thought, am I supposed to have a violent, visceral reaction? Am I supposed to let it go? Am I supposed to educate? How am I supposed to react? And so that's just one example of the significance of being a Black American. And then there's the additional things about being a Black male in America, where there's all these stereotypes of how you're supposed to be, how you're perceived when you walk down the street, how when people started crossing the street and looking at me, I'd say out of fear. That started happening around 14 or 15. I didn't even get it. I thought that I was doing something wrong and not just being myself. And so my parents, they were worried about me too. And for different reasons, again, because they didn't exactly know how to handle this, because they hadn't been educated through the lens of being Black in America. So we all just had to learn together. And it really culminated together after Trayvon Martin was shot, where my mom just started saying, okay, I need, like, you can't wear your hoodie up. And so I just thought, why? Like, we're in Portland. This has never been a lesson conveyed to me before. And she didn't have the right words to explain it, but she just knew the weight and significance of me walking down the street, being just like 6'3", dark skinned, wearing a hoodie, and just like the power that that has in America.
So how did your parents navigate that? Because you were a teen, a young teen at the time. How did they find, or how should they, either how did they or how would you suggest others find help in figuring out how to help your child? In the example you gave would be, how should you respond to the N-word? What is an effective way to handle that? And of course, it would probably depend on the situation. So how did your parents help you figure out how to be a Black man in America?
So the way they went about it was they started teaching me just the facts about the significance of it. But then what I'm most impressed about, and definitely kudos to them and why I love them so much, is they just looked at the situation and said, we are not best equipped to help Nathan here. So we're going to support him, but also we're going to encourage him to find and reach out to people who are going to be able to explain this to him and explain the significance. And so when I went on my trip to Mississippi, we went to Emmett Till's memorial, and I heard the story from the voice of a Black man who's lived that experience and just been surrounded by that his whole life, and me recognizing, okay, this is actual historical and cultural weight, not the kind you read about in a textbook. This impacts people's lives every single day. And so through that, my parents have been constant resources in finding me people who I'm able to talk to, and just being there to be able to debrief it and listen to me for as long as they need to talk about it. Because we all recognize there's something incredibly important in my life, and they're putting me in front of their own fear, I would say, of what can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their fear of losing you, to be honest. I think sometimes white parents are afraid that if their children identify too strongly or with a different culture, that somehow they will lose their child, that their child will become uh, more part of a culture that they're not a part of. And it sounds like your parents did not feel threatened in that way.
My parents didn't feel threatened in that way, no. They saw that, well, I mean, one of the things my dad said to me when I was 17 is just, we were at a restaurant and he leaned over and said, do you realize that people probably don't recognize we're father and son? Just because we look so different. My dad's white with like gray hair, and I'm much darker than him with black curly hair. His is straight. So we look incredibly different from each other. And so he was able to recognize that he wasn't the best equipped for this, and that he's going to be able to raise me as a person, but there are just some things that he wasn't going to be able to teach me because he hadn't lived those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that he would have to learn along with you, but that he couldn't be the teacher. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. His support was the most crucial thing.
And Angie, you've talked about coming to understanding more of your racial identity. Was your family able to be supportive, or did they feel in some way perhaps insecure with your exploration?
My family was very, very supportive, and I remember I was about 15, 14, and the internet, AOL, had just come out, and we were getting access to information we had never had before. And I went online, and I knew my birth mother's first and last name, and I figured Miami, where I was born, and I found her, and I got her phone number. And I called it, and she didn't speak English, and so that was kind of it. It was like this quick end. And I told my mom about it, and she did get very upset. And she said exactly what you said. She didn't want to lose me. And I was still young at the time. I was still, in grade school. So I very well could have, who knows? I understood her fears. But then at 24 years old, when I actually did meet my family, and I was traveling the world to meet them and visit them and have these experiences, she was so happy for me. And she knew, I was an adult, and she knew that I was an adult, There, I wasn't going to go live with somebody else. I already moved out of the house and everything. So she was just happy that I had this experience. But she did go through a point where she was very insecure about, what might happen if I found my family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Jack, you've talked about having some cultural experiences with the in Vietnamese culture. Were your parents supportive of your exploration?
My parents, yeah, of course they are always supportive. I mean, to which specific event are you referring to?
But just in general, as you
Oh,
as you
just in
became
general?
learning more about your culture and more interested in how you identify as a Vietnamese American.
Oh yeah, yeah. My parents were always very supportive. Like I said, they never try to push, me trying to learn about more, and embrace Vietnamese culture and heritage. Um, but it was never always that was never always the fact with me though. I was always very resistant to learning about Vietnamese culture and heritage and anything even remotely Asian, when I was younger. I always thought that was something that would get me in trouble, just with like other people because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be white. I wanted to be like my siblings and my parents. But like I said, when I was 16, it wasn't until I came more, to terms about, that's when that happened. But my parents were always there for me.
So as a younger child, really up until mid-adolescence, you didn't want to learn about your birth culture because you felt that it would make you stand out as different and highlight the fact that you were different.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Let me pause now to thank two of our partners. As a nonprofit, Creating a Family partners with agencies that believe in our mission of providing unbiased support, both pre-adoption as well as post-adoption. And these are agencies who are willing to support us because they believe in our mission. One such agency is Children's Connection. They are an adoption agency providing services for domestic infant adoption and embryo donation and adoption throughout the U.S., as well as home studies and post-adoption support to families in Texas. And we have Vista Del Mar. They are a licensed nonprofit adoption agency with over 65 years of experience helping to create families. They offer home study only services, as well as full service infant adoption, international adoption, and post-adoption. And they also have a foster to adopt program. You can get more information about them online at vistadelmar.org. We received, in anticipation for this show, a comment from another transracial adoptee who is African American, raised by white parents. And she talked about feeling very comfortable with both races. And she described this as an advantage that's seldom talked about. But she said it was an easy fluidity. I thought that was a great way to say it, an easy fluidity that she thinks that she has that often that others don't have. I suppose being raised in a family, a transracial family, you would have that as well. But I thought that was an interesting point, and I could also see that it would be a burden to feel like you have to be the bridge between the two. So I could see it both ways. But anyway, I thought I would get your opinions on that being comfortable being in both worlds and being able to understand and see both worlds. So Katie, let me start with you. Do you see that at all?
I don't think so. I don't think I have enough knowledge about the Chinese culture to say that I can fit or bridge between the two. So for me personally, I don't have that.
No. Okay. Nathan, what about you?
I would say that there's fluidity, but it came through work and it did come through recognition that before anything else, I'm going to be me first. And so once I found that comfort and was able to really just get out of my comfort zone, something I'm still learning how to do. It's never like a finished process. I found
No,
that
it isn't.
I'm able to have, it definitely isn't. I found that I'm able to have an easier fluidity, but it's not easy yet.
Mm-hmm. You're hoping that it will become, but it's not yet.
I am hoping so, yes. Growing up in Portland, there wasn't very much Black influence around me that was easily accessible. But so while I am learning, I found that I've definitely been accepted into both cultures very quickly. It just still is an interesting adjustment.
Okay, Angie, do you see, and you're about 10 years older than the others, so you may have 10 years more, shall we say more wisdom, or more experience anyway. Do you see, would you agree with this other comment, or do you not see so much of that?
I think for everybody, it's something different because that particular person could also be an extrovert, which means that they're just capable of blending, into different communities and societies in general. I do think that it gives us a very well-rounded viewpoint, which is an advantage in society, especially when it comes to communications, especially when there's things like social media where all the information's out and there's so many stereotypes and so much judging. We have this superpower to kind of be able to see both sides. And like I mentioned before, I do tend to be able to weave through different communities and cultures, and being in this mixed family has definitely helped me, establish that characteristic so much better. But it depends on who the person is. An introvert is not going to work the same.
That is such a good point, and I'm glad you raised it. We tend to, we one of my pet peeves is we tend to treat adoptees as this fungible unit, and of course, not only is being adopted one aspect of their life, but we have to take their temperament into account. And you're exactly right that that who we are and just our fundamental temperament and personality absolutely influences our experience. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Absolutely.
Jack, how about you? What has been your experience on moving between the Vietnamese culture and the white culture, white American culture?
I find that moving through the white culture, it's something that's very comfortable to me, because, of my family and that's how I was raised. But another thing about like the Vietnamese culture, moving through that is like it could be like I still find it very enlightening and very, it's like I'm still discovering a lot of things every single day. And every single, moment that I have the opportunity to be able to do something related to it. And I I think both experiences really help shape who I am.
Both the experience of being, okay, that makes sense. Both cultures and experiences.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you all, Katie Bullard, Nathan Faust, Jack Torella, and Angie Legg, for being on this interview today. I really appreciate your presence and your wisdom. Quite frankly, you're helping shape what the next generation their experience will be, and I'm truly appreciative of that, and truly appreciative of what you're offering to adoptive parents, because you guys are the experts, really, in adoption. Certainly in transracial adoption, you are, and we need to learn from you. And I am very appreciative of you being here. Let me remind everybody that the views expressed in this show are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the positions of Creating a Family, our partners, or our underwriters. Keep in mind that the information given in this interview is general advice. To understand how it applies to your specific situation, you can work with your adoption or foster care professional. Thanks for joining us today, and I will see you next week.